Welcome back, everyone. Mr. Allen here. So today we're going to go over functions and subs in Visual Basic. Just sort of off to the side here, I've noted the terms methods and procedures you would hear in other languages would be more or less the same thing. So if you hear any of those four terms, what we're talking about are sub-programs, smaller programs, pieces essentially of our bigger program that have been separated from the rest. So just kind of going over some of the ideas here. The purpose of functions and subs is to separate our code into smaller chunks. This allows us to do a few things. One of them is isolate problems. If I write a function or a sub and I know it's working and then I have a problem later on, I know enough not to mess with that piece. Well, that piece was working, so if something else isn't working later on, I know that it has to be a different section of the code. It really allows us to isolate problems that way. As a general rule, a function or sub should do as little as possible in order to be as reusable as possible. So if you think about the idea that if my function finds the minimum value in between three numbers, and it prints out the minimum value, and it tells you if two of the values were the same, and it does sort of several different things, that's great perhaps for me today. But another time, really just having it pull out the minimum value would be what I would want. And so if we keep our subs and functions as simple as possible, send the information in, get the information back, and then allow the user to do what they want with it, that's really how subs and functions become the most valuable. They get one thing done, do it well, and then the user can make use of the result in any way they choose. I don't necessarily want a message box popping up every time I run my sub or my function, but if I can get it to do the thing it needs to, and I then choose to print something out, that's fine. And I can print it in a list box, or I can print it into a file later on, or I can put it into a message box on the screen. So again, do as little as possible in order to keep it as valuable as possible. And then the last and probably the most important of these ideas is that your code must be transportable. I say should here, but really if it's a good sub or function, it is a must situation. That means that when I take the code that I wrote today and I stick it into a program next year, or I send it to one of my students or one of my friends, they should be able to take my code, copy and paste it exactly into their program and have it work perfectly first try. They shouldn't need to look at the variable names that I used and switch out the variable names that they're using, and they shouldn't have to dim something somewhere in the program that isn't already there. So basically, it should be transportable, meaning it should not use any global variables. So nothing in the method there should be nothing in the method that's not dimmed somewhere in the method or that doesn't exist somewhere in the method. There should be no input. It should never be asking somebody to type in something or other so I can figure out the next value. And usually subs and functions should not print unless that is their exact and only purpose. And then the difference between the two essentially is functions find or calculate a specific value and return the answer. So if you think about something like I need to find the cube root of something, just in a regular classroom situation, I give that information to a student, or I give that information to a computer, or I give that information to the calculator, and then the calculator tells me what the answer is. That's the idea of a function. I send in these values and it sends back, yes, those values are good, or it sends back 12 is the answer to when I use those values. A sub is basically a function that just does not return something. So it completes a task, but it doesn't send back 6 as the answer. It just does what it needs to do. One of the early ones you'll see in the next section is swapping two values. So if I send in two numbers, 6 and 8, the sub that's called swap will flip them around so that 8 comes out into the first variable, 6 comes out into the second variable. They've essentially swapped spots. But nothing is actually returned. There's no 6 as the answer. It's just here, they've been flip-flopped, move on.